Hello Fontanians and Swifties, Aaron here, back with another video. Nearly 2 years have gone by since the last Geo character was given to us, but it is finally time. The long-awaited beautiful leading lady of the Spina de Rosula is finally here.
Taylor Smith, everyone. Thank you, Taylor.
But before we get into talking about her kit and how she functions, I just want to say that if you do like my content, why not take a bite out of that meringue cookie-flavored subscribe button down below. Also, do note that chapters are in the description for you to peruse at your leisure. The songs used in this video are down there too, in case you enjoyed any of the bops I played for you. But with that, let's move on to the overview. Taylor, or Navia, is a Geo DPS unit with a focus on her elemental skills, burst damage. Her normal attacks have her swing her claymore around, dealing physical damage. The thing of note is using all 4 of her normal attacks in her normal attack string will take 4 seconds. The same can be said for the attack combo of 3 normal attacks, a dash, and 2 more normal attacks. This is important because she can be played on field due to one of her passives, which we will get to later. Navia's skill has her whip out her gunbrella, dealing damage in front of her. This damage area of effect is very low, but it can still hit multiple enemies. The damage this deals has monstrously high scaling due to its stacking mechanic. Whenever someone in the party obtains a shard created by the crystallized reaction, Navia gains a bullet with a max amount of bullets she can have being 6. These bullets will be removed after her skill has been unleashed. Each bullet harshly increases the base damage multiplier granted to her skill. This base damage multiplier can be increased up to 200%, which will be granted when she has 3 bullets. Every extra bullet after that will increase the damage dealt by that shot by 15% up to 45%. Her skill has a hold state as well, but the only difference between this and her tapped version is that she will not be able to move, she will gain a crap ton of interruption resistance, and she will absorb crystallized shards in an area around her. This skill has 2 charges, with a 9-second cooldown each. With her skill, she will also deal Usia aligned damage once per 7 seconds. Next is her burst, which has Navia call a missile to be fired in an area in front of her. Afterward, supportive fire will rain down from above in an area around her and following her for 12 seconds. This supportive fire acts very similarly to both Ganyu's and Ayato's elemental burst, except Navia's is not stationary. Every 2.4 seconds while her burst is active, she will gain a bullet stack for her skill, which equates to a total of 5 bullets per elemental burst. However, because her burst hits around 16 times, she has the potential to generate crystallized shields while off-field, which will end up doubling the amount of bullets this generates on average. Navia's first ascension passive grants her a Geo Elemental infusion on her normal attacks for 4 seconds after using her skill. She also gains 40% normal charged and plunging attack damage bonus while this infusion is active. This is what enables her to act as an on-field damage dealing unit. Navia's 4th ascension passive grants her 20% attack for each other party member of the Pyro, Hydro, Electro, and Cryo elements. This passive caps at 40% attack, which turns out to be a pretty nice damage boost for Navia. Now that we're done with the overview, let's move on to talent priority. Navia's talent priority is pretty easy. The only tricky thing about them is that the amount of damage coming from each source will fluctuate depending on the scenario. Most times, her skill takes up most of her damage, but this can sometimes be overtaken by her normal attacks or her burst. This is not entirely because her damage is evenly split between each part of her kit, as it's more like a 35-45-20 split, but instead it's because her active hitboxes are pretty wonky and rather small. But in most situations, her skill is where a massive portion of her damage is focused, so we'll want to level that first. Her burst and normal attacks can then be leveled together. However, her bursts will be hitting more consistently than her normal attacks, so I will recommend making that the priority of the two. Navia's combos are a bit trickier, but every combo starts the same. Navia should always be one of the first 2 characters to start a rotation. Her first time on field is set specifically to use her skill, then burst to generate bullets for her skill, then swap through the rest of her team. After that, go back to Navia and use her skill immediately. This is the point where the playstyles take on different combos. As the main DPS, you'll want to continue by using 3 normal attacks, dash canceling, then using 2 normal attacks. Use her skill and then repeat the same normal attack rotation done before. The rotation for a quick swap comp is much easier though, as all you want to do is alternate back to Navia after using every other character to use her skill and then swap off. Make sure to keep swapping through everyone else to continue generating energy and outputting damage. Navia should come back on field about twice before the rotation starts all over. With her base kit and playstyles out of the the way, let's move on to discussing what constellations are worth pulling for. Navia's first constellation is pretty good, as it decreases the cooldown of her burst and generates more energy for her. It doesn't equate to something like a massive damage buff, but it does help reduce her energy requirement by between 15 to 35%, usually averaging around 20%. On top of that, it also pretty much guarantees that her burst has permanent uptime. This is incredibly beneficial for keeping her skill at max stacks, since her burst generates the bullets of her skill. It is a pretty valuable constellation, as it increases her damage output by about 6% at the minimum. This constellation can prove to be better on live, depending on how hard it is to stack her skill's max damage. However, I don't expect that to be exceedingly difficult. Her second constellation is much more valuable, as it increases the crit rate of her elemental skill by 8%, up to a max of 24% based on how many bullets she has stacked up. Additionally, every skill cast launches an instance of her burst's supportive fire at the enemy. This constellation has a lot of additional damage, and turns out to increase her damage output by about 12.5%. Navia's third constellation increases the level of her skill, since this is a significant portion of her damage, and since she scales so insanely hard with this multiplier, it will increase her damage by a tremendous 12.5%, just like her last one. Her C4 is just as good, but it depends more on the situation. 20% geo resistance shred that her burst now applies is incredibly good for all sorts of situations, and gets even better the more geo characters she is paired with. This resistance shred will buff every geo member's damage output by about 9%. This constellation also enables her to function as the best sub-DPS buffing support for other main DPS geo characters like Ningguang or Ito. This is also the point where she starts dealing similar damage to other overpowered main DPS units like C2 Raiden, C1 Hu Tao, and C0 Alhaitham, Ayaka, and Nuvilet. This constellation is really good, and in my opinion, it is her second best. On the other side of the spectrum, we have Navia's fifth constellation, which increases the level of her burst by 3. This offers nothing other than damage though, and it's not even that great, as it leads to only a 4.5% damage increase. Switching it up again, we have her C6, which increases the crit damage of her skill by 35% for each bullet she has stored past the first 3. Additionally, every bullet consumed beyond the first 3 will be refunded to her. This constellation leads to a massive 105% crit damage bonus for the main source of her damage output, and then makes getting this bonus and the max base damage bonus much more consistent. This is incredibly good, and will grant Navia a 23% damage increase. All around, Navia's constellations are pretty mid, with the exception of her 4th and her 6th. Most of her constellations offer nothing other than damage except for her 4th, and none of them open her up to new possibilities, again except for her 4th. On top of that, nothing here is very powerful, as she needs her 4th constellation at a minimum to reach the same heights as some of the better DPS units in the game. In my opinion, her constellations are all of very little value, to the point where I cannot recommend anyone go for them. But with constellations completed, let's now get into Navia's builds, starting with artifact options. The first to start out with is the newest Geo artifact set. Nighttime Whispers of the Echoing Woods is Navia's best all-around artifact set. It grants her an 18% attack bonus, a 16% Geo damage bonus, and an extra 24% Geo damage bonus when she's on field and has a crystallized shield. This is an incredibly powerful set of bonuses for Navia, as she scales very hard with all of those stats. This set is best for her on-field playstyle, and still holds up very well when using a quick swap playstyle. However, Golden Troop will surpass the Nighttime Whispers when it comes to this quick swap playstyle. Since 75% of her damage in this playstyle comes from her skill anyway, buffing her skill even more will always be better than splitting the damage 50-50. However, the damage difference between the two is very minor, as the total team damage with the Golden Troop set will only be about 1% better than the Nighttime Whispers set. Another set to note is the Mireille Chassé Hunter artifact set, which is best used by Navia, but only when paired Fiorina and when Navia is on field. This set is better than Nighttime Whispers, however I still can't recommend it completely because of Fiorina's lack of synergy with Navia's team comps, which I will talk about a bit more in depth later on in the video. However, if you don't have any of these 4-piece sets available, you can always use a 2-piece mix of any of the attack percents, the Geo damage bonus from Archaic Petra, and the elemental skill damage bonus from the Golden Troop set. However, do note that upgrading to any of the 4-piece sets above will be massive for Navia, as they tend to be about 10% better than any 2-piece combo. For main stats, you're going to want to look for attack percent on the sands, geo damage on the goblet, and crit on the circlet, just as any other DPS would. There's not much leeway here unless you end up using a C2 plus Furina, in which case you can swap the geo damage for an attack percent goblet. Substats would include energy recharge depending on the comp. With a good amount of geoparticles funneling into her, she can run up to around 125% when used as a main DPS, but if geo funneling is lacking, this can shoot up to 160%. Quick swap teams can lower this requirement further to anywhere between 100% and 145%. After that, crit comes first as usual, then more attack percent. Everything else is a dead stat on Navia, so sticking to these few will always be best. Next up, we have her weapon options. However, Navia has two different playstyles that focus on different portions of her kit. This does inevitably change how strong certain weapons are when paired with her, so we will be taking a look at what changes when the swap is made. Since most of the vocal Navia mains want this particular playstyle, we'll start with her main DPS potential first. Here, her best weapon turns out to not be what you think. The Serpent Spine is her best option as a main DPS due to the insane damage percent buff and great amount of crit rate. However, this thing starts to fall off the more damage percent she has, and if you don't play flawlessly or have a shield. It is a very powerful weapon, but it can drop to second place if you're not getting the most out of it. Her second best would then be her signature axe. This weapon offers her an insane amount of attack to scale with, along with crit rate, attack percent, and elemental skill damage. It is her best all-around weapon, and unlike Serpent Spine, it is super consistent. Next, we have the Redhorn Stone Thresher, which is up this high due to the insane crit damage and the fantastic flat damage buff to her normal and charged attacks. While she will not be building into defense, the raw flat damage buff from her base stats is still incredibly large, which is why this is up so high. Then we have Beacon of the Reed Sea, which is the more global version of her signature weapon. This can end up surpassing her signature weapon if she gets hit to get the second attack percent buff. However, this is relatively unlikely since she will usually want Zhongli or she will be off-field. Skyward Pride is also pretty good since it offers a large base attack, enough energy recharge to meet her base requirement, extra scaling for her normal attacks, and an all-around percent damage bonus. This weapon is very good for Navia and will be her best, most readily obtainable weapon option out there. After that, we have the Talking Stick, which is one of the newer Battle Pass weapons. This offers a lot of attack for Navia and a bit of crit rate. The true benefit to this weapon is specifically when she's paired with Bennett, as he will always offer her the attack percent part of this passive. This weapon is so strong because of the extra conditional damage percent on the passive effect. Even if the conditions are not met though, this weapon will still be around the same spot in terms of damage output. Then we have the Song of Broken Pines, which just serves as a glorified attack stat stick for Navia. After the Song of Broken Pines is where the rest of the weapons come into play, including the Ultimate Overlord's Mega Magic Sword. This weapon offers a monstrous amount of attack for Navia to scale with, and it grants her enough energy recharge to reach her base requirements. Hydral's Shadow is next, however, it's only really valuable when Navia gets healed. Otherwise, the Wolf's Gravestone and the Unforged will be the better weapons. This weapon order does change up a bit if Navia is used as a quick swap unit, since her normal attacks will be taken out of the situation. In these comps, the weapons that drop lower in value are Serpent Spine, Redhorn Stone Thresher, Song of Broken Pines, Skyward Pride, and Ultimate Overlord's Mega Magic Sword. This is because these weapons offer stats that benefit normal attacks, which she doesn't use anymore, and or they grant energy recharge, which matters less in these teams because of the constant energy they generate. With this in mind, I would recommend using the Ultimate Overlord's Mega Magic Sword as a base, but if you don't have this weapon, the Tidal Shadow, Prototype Archaic, and the Luxurious Sea Lord are the next best free-to-play weapons she has available. If you're looking for upgrades, I would recommend the Wolf's Gravestone first because it can be used on and off field and it can buff other party members. But if you have Skyward Pride, that can also work wonders. If you're willing to drop a few dollars, then and only then would I recommend the Serpent's Spine, since it is incredibly powerful for her both on and off field. While her signature axe may be good, and while it may be S tier in aesthetics, it's not good enough to warrant getting over the other options. Now that we geared her up, let's move on and see who Navia pairs well with. Two of her best synergistic pairs are Bennett and Zhongli. First is Bennett, who is the unit that Navia gets the most use of. She has a massive need for attack to scale with, which Bennett provides to an absurd degree. On top of that, he also doubles as a support unit. His only downside is circle impact, but Navia doesn't care about this as much as other units might because of her elemental skill. Zhongli is another insanely valuable unit for Navia for multiple reasons. He offers the best shield in the game, attack percent, geo resistance shred from his shield and from geo resonance, damage percent from geo resonance, and he can serve as a fantastic battery for her. Zhongli is an insanely powerful unit with Navia and will work as one of her best all-around supports. While these may be her two best synergies, she can also work well with a few others, though these units have harsher downsides. Goro is first, as he is also a very good support for Navia. While he might offer mostly defense buffs, which she doesn't scale with, he also offers her geo resonance, damage percent when 3 geo members are in the party, and geo crit damage when he's at C6. He also can consistently consistently cause crystallized reactions, and he can pull in crystallized shards while he's off-field. On top of this, he's normally built as a mega battery, meaning Navia will have to build little energy when paired with him. His only downsides are that he does not offer defensive utility, and he does not offer enough buffs for Navia if he's not paired with 2 other Geo members and when he's not at C6. Ningguang is another unit that Navia benefits a lot from due to her percent damage buffs, ability to unlock the use of Geo Resonance, and her ability to also serve as an insane battery for Navia. On top of this, she works very well as a final pick in attack scaling geocentric teams since she also scales well with attack. She can also just be used as an attack percent buffing support for Navia when wielding the Noblesse set and when using the Thrilling Tales of the Dragon Slayer. These two are fantastic together, which shows as Ningguang will usually slightly outperform Goro in terms of team damage output in certain comps. Albedo is another Geo unit that works well with Navia, though not as well as others. His main benefits are his battery potential, his consistent off-field damage, and his ability to consistently grant Navia Geo shards for her skill. However, he is normally the worst option of the other two due to his reliance on Goro for a lot of damage, his lack of utility, and because his main damage source can be easily destroyed. And finally, we have Furina. On top of granting Navia some attack percent due to her Ascension 4 passive, Furina serves as the best raw damage team-wide buffing support in the entire game. However, she requires a team-wide healer in order to be this good. This is where the issue comes into play, as Navia gains little benefit from the healers that work well with Furina. This is so incredibly awkward because best units for this are Jean and Baiju, who both don't react with Geo, or Mika and Charlotte, who enable freeze reactions which have the potential to reduce crystallized shield production. This amount of clunk and awkward team building is so strange that it's normally not worth using her as a support for Navia unless you have a C6 Furina, or if you're using Noelle. Speaking of, before we move past how characters impact Navia, I want to take a moment to compare Navia to Noelle, as they are quite similar. Both Navia and Noelle are female Geo Claymore DPS units that can also work well in quick swap scenarios. However, Noelle has a massive amount of healing, she builds full into defense, and she has an incredibly thick shield. This means that her and her team comps are significantly safer than Navia comps. On top of this, Noelle is a 4-star unit that has been in the game since the very beginning. You would think that this would mean Navia would be stronger than Noelle. However, if we put them in teams with some of their highest personal damage output, Noelle ends up dealing about 3.7% more damage than Navia. However, we learned a long time ago that if we are to compare two units, we should also see how they function together. In that case, let's move on to team compositions. Where she will perform best is in quick swap Geo teams as a quick swap DPS unit. Most of her damage comes from her skill anyway, so instead of wasting time using her on field, it's best to swap out and use other units' skills to battery the team for the next rotation, similarly to how an Ayaka comp would. This would end up lowering the energy requirement of Navia and her team, which allows them to build more into damage. So while Navia will take a hefty 13% hit in her damage output, her team will end up dealing up to 40% more damage than once where she is used on field. The two main variations of these comps are split between attack and defense scaling characters. The attack comps are much more free-to-play friendly and revolve around swapping between Ningguang, Navia, and Bennett to battery the team while dealing massive burst damage. The defense comps are slightly different though, as they focus more on Noelle for damage and healing, while occasionally swapping into Navia for her massive skill damage and battery potential. While Navia might not scale directly with defense, the defense-focused comps usually provide enough buffs outside the main stat they revolve around that she will still deal a considerable amount of damage. While the attack-focused team is much more akin to that of a normal quick swap comp, the defense-focused one could be compared to using Navia more as a sub-DPS unit. This is still best with Noelle since it merely replaces swapping into Goro to battery Noelle during her on-field infusion window with Navia, who will do a similar job while also outputting a tremendous amount of burst damage. However, other main DPS Geo units can also utilize Navia's burst damage and battery potential, just as not as well as Noelle can. While quick swap teams may be her best playstyle, she can also work well as a simple main DPS unit. While she will only perform at an average level, she will still offer enough damage to get through most content. However, there is also a main DPS comp variant that focuses on Urina. The issue with this is that the only character that would really fit here would be Charlotte, since she constantly applies cryo for more crystallized shards. On top of this, she heals the entire team over time, and she can be used to buff Navia. However, freeze will almost never be active, and there is no prime fourth party member for these teams. You can also use Jean for less personal damage for Navia, but with more application and more damage for the team. However, this comp still suffers from the lack of units that pair well with both Navia and Furina, as either Furina is useless in these comps or Navia is not getting buffed enough. This is mainly why I'm against using Furina and Navia outside of Noelle comp comps at the moment, as this clunk she brings to the team ends up making Furina's teams worse than others when she's at C0. However, they do become much more manageable when Furina is at C1, and they are completely fixed when Furina is at C6. Until then, you might as well just use her with Hyperbloom, as it fixes most issues that Furina comps have, yet makes Navia irrelevant to the team. So with all this in mind, let's move on to the rating. Navia's damage as a main DPS is average. She could beat out some other units, but only the generally weaker ones. The point at which she excels is in quick swap teams, where she will output much more damage than most other characters can as a quick swap DPS. In fact, I would go so far to say that she's the best quick swap DPS in the game. With all that said, I'm going to have to give her a 5 for damage output as a quick swap unit, but I will have to lower it to a 2.5 as a main DPS character. Now, Navia is the first Geo character we've had in about 2 years. However, I did not start doing these videos around the time of Genshin's release, so Navia is the first Geo character I'm rating. The reason I bring this up is because I have no real clue on how to rate the application for Geo characters because they don't react. Instead, they can ruin reactions if they have too much application. So technically, I could give certain Geo characters a negative score here. However, my ranking system is punishing enough in this category. So instead, I'll start off my trend of rating Geo characters application with Navia, granting her a 0. In terms of offensive utility, she has nothing other than her 4th Constellations Geo Resistance Shred. While it is a good form of offensive utility as it helps out her own damage, her team's damage, and it unlocks her ability to be used as a sub-DPS buffer, it is very hard to get this constellation and not many will get it, so I will ignore it, which means she earns a 0 here. For battery potential, Navia's is pretty high. She's able to generate about 7 energy if used as a main DPS, or even more if used in quick swap teams due to her extra skill cast. This would earn her a 5 for battery potential in a quick swap team, or a 3.5 if used in any other comp where she can only get 2 skill casts off. In terms of defensive utility, Navia has the crystallized reaction. It ain't much, but hey, it's there, so I'll give her a 1 out of 5. Navia is limited by almost everything, so her flexibility and versatility rating will be low. The world hates her and forces this Geo character that doesn't want to use other Geo characters in her team to use other Geo characters in her team. On top of that, she heavily desires Bennett due to the massive attack buffs he offers. She benefits from this buff much more than most other characters due to her innate and massive base damage multiplier and talent scalings. Without these two requirements, her damage will normally be as impactful as cold tomato soup. However, she can act as multiple roles in those teams, especially at higher constellations, which is super beneficial. So I will grant her a 1.5 for flexibility and versatility. With all this in mind, I'm going to grant Navia a bad rating of 1.5 out of 5 as a main DPS unit. In this spot, she's just the worst version of Noelle, who can do all Navia can, but slightly better, and while also being a massive tank. However, as a quick swap DPS, she does perform a bit better, so I will give her a below average 2 out of 5 here. All in all, I see Navia as an utter disappointment. She's in a very confusing state at the moment where she does a good amount of everything, but not very well. On top of that, she's Geo, so she needs insane raw damage numbers to do almost anything. She has multiple other issues too, including her main damage source's lack of good AoE, making it hard to get max benefit out of in AoE situations, her reliance on strong sources of application in her team, else she won't get max stacks of her buff in single target situations, the possibility of overkilling with her skills damage, which then technically lowers her total damage output, her lack of good compositions, and her inability to utilize reactions as she is instead held back by her massive reliance on the crystallized reaction for any semblance of a damage output. She has a lot of issues that Eula has, while also being bottlenecked into a niche that is not strong and that is detrimental to other team comps that you might try and force her into. At the current moment, I believe that she is the worst limited 5-star character in the game. However, I am aware that Hoyoverse plans to implement some massive buffs to her base kit and constellations, so my opinion will most likely change within the next few days. If it does change, I'll see toward uploading a short video on the matter. But now I want to hear your opinions. What do you think of Navia? Do you think that she's as bad as I do? Or do you think I'm over-exaggerating? Do you still plan to get her despite everything? How do you intend to use her? Tell me your thoughts in the comments below. But with that, I will bid you all farewell. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you all next time. Bye bye!